All right. Uh, I introduce teacher and historian Peter Oxenfeld.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. Do you think the U.S. bombing of Syria is justified?
Well, considering what Bashar al-Assad had done, um, there is there is a lot of emotion wrapped around why we would go in and bomb. My personal big problem with this is that though on the one hand, um, this is a major humanitarian crisis, on the other hand, the United States wasn't attacked personally. And so it leaves me to question whether we have a defense department or whether we have an offense department.
Very good. Has the U.S. taken advantage of this military power that we have to signify a symbolism for America and Trump?
I think that Trump is doing a whole lot of saber rattling, and I think part of that is because he wants to make sure that his presidency is legitimized, and um, I think that uh, we see stuff like this with Korea. He's sending ships over to Korea. Korea's responding in kind, and there's a lot of that going on. So I seem to think that President Trump is pretty much saber rattling because he needs to make sure that his presidency is legitimate.
Yeah. Was the U.S. supposed to take action for the chemical attack in Syria, or could some other country do that?
Well, I think that there are other countries that could have gotten involved and really should have taken the lead in dealing with Syria. I mean, Syria is a mess. It is a hot mess. And so I think you've got nations like Saudi Arabia or Iran or Turkey or Jordan, even Israel to a certain extent. Um, they really need to be actively involved. I really have an issue with the United States being the policeman of the world. Um, there's justification for going in and dealing with these humanitarian crises that rise up, but I don't think that military action should be our only response to these types of crises that come up.
Why do you think other countries like Russia and Saudi Arabia didn't take action?
I think because we like to be the world's police. There's something very American about going into all these different parts of the world and sort of flexing our muscles and showing how proud we are to be Americans. And there's nothing wrong with that to a certain extent. I think that we should be proud to be Americans. But at the same time, we need to really truly believe in this idea of being able to choose our own destiny, and that uh, if people want to live a certain way, if they want to live under oppression, then they should be free to do that. Now, I think that the other nations surrounding, um, I think that they didn't act because we did it all for them.
Yeah. Um, do you think this chain of events could point towards a highly feared World War III?
I do think that we're on the brink of something very bad and very disastrous if the politicians in all these other countries don't, you know, don't start thinking of things in new ways. I mean, we're looking at nationalist populism um, making its way through Europe right now. It looks like France is about to elect a nationalist populist. Of course, America did with President Trump. Um, I think this sort of nationalism um, will ultimately lead to the kind of protectionist trade and the rise of tariffs all across the world, which ultimately you start limiting the free trade and the free flow of money from one place to the other. And people get upset about that. And so I think that it's very likely that all this saber rattling is going to lead to a pretty catastrophic event if we don't put the brakes on some of this stuff that our politicians are doing.
Mm-hmm. What is your version of being a world policeman?
I think a world policeman is somebody who assumes the mantle of the moral authority. And because that person or that group or that nation is the moral authority for the way things are run in this world, there is no room for compromise. It tends to lead to a tyrannical form of governance, and if it's implemented on the world stage, that could be catastrophic, because that will completely undermine what we as Americans believe in, which one of our fundamental founding principles is individual liberty, the right for a free people to do as they choose. And having this sort of moral authoritarianism is problematic, because the culture that you have on one side of the world is not the culture that you have on the other side of the world. I mean, we in America, we live our lives one way, you know, and I mean, we're very diverse. We have a diverse population and a diversity of cultures within our culture. But if we were suddenly under the dominant rule of, say, a Russia or a Kenya, I mean, can you imagine a Kenyan government telling Americans how they're supposed to trade with each other? What constitutes a marriage? I mean, it wouldn't fly here in America. So what gives us the right to tell people in Kenya or in Cambodia or Australia how they're supposed to live their lives? So I think it's a very delicate balance. When you're doing good in the world, which there are a lot of organizations in America that do good in the world, that promote women's rights, promote all sorts of, you know, bringing water to the poor, trying to feed people and deal with the homeless issues. And there are people that are doing very good work. Those people need to be promoted. But I think that there's a very different dynamic when you have people that are looking to implement what they think is a moral authority and what other people are doing in terms of actual humanitarian good. And sometimes people conflate them, and whenever they get conflated, things turn out disastrous.
All right. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.